Walk into any high street furniture shop right now, and 9 times out of 10, what you're looking at isn't really wood. It's a photograph of wood wrapped around compressed sawdust and glue. And for years, that was fine. It was cheap, it was quick, and it looked good enough in the showroom lighting. But something has shifted. Across Britain, homeowners are quietly walking past the flat pack aisles and heading straight for solid oak, ash, and reclaimed pine. Not because it's trendy, because they've worked out what actually happens to that wood-look furniture after 3 years in a British home. The swelling, the peeling edges, the chipboard crumbling at the corners. This isn't a fashion trend, it's a correction. And once you understand why it's happening, you'll never look at a flat pack wardrobe the same way again. Let's start with a question. Most people never ask themselves, when they're stood in a shop, credit card in hand, what is this furniture actually made of, and how long is it built to last? For most of us, furniture shopping has always been about 3 things: how it looks, how much it costs, and whether it fits through the front door. Since the 1990s, British homes have been quietly filled with what the trade calls engineered board, MDF, chipboard, and particle board. Dressed up in a thin skin of wood effect veneer or laminate, it photographs beautifully, it flat packs efficiently, and it's a fraction of the price of solid timber. On paper, it looks like progress, but walk into enough British homes, especially the older stone cottages, the damp Victorian terraces, the coastal bungalows that catch every bit of sea air, and you start to see the same story repeating itself. A wardrobe bought 4 years ago with swollen, crumbling corners. A kitchen table with a laminate top that's started to lift and bubble near the sink. A chest of drawers where the veneer has peeled back like sunburnt skin, revealing the gray chipboard underneath. This is the part nobody puts in the advert. Why engineered board struggles in British homes. Britain's climate is, frankly, a nightmare for anything made from compressed wood particles and glue. We don't get the dry, stable air of a Mediterranean country or the consistent central heating of somewhere like Scandinavia. We get damp winters, humid summers, houses with patchy heating, and a lot of homes, particularly older ones, that were never built with modern insulation in mind. MDF and chipboard are essentially sawdust held together with resin under pressure. That resin does an impressive job in a factory-controlled environment. But introduce real-world humidity. A steamed-up bathroom, a kitchen with a kettle on constantly, a bedroom with condensation on a cold morning, and that resin starts to lose its grip. The board swells. Once it swells, it doesn't shrink back to its original shape. The damage is permanent. That's the first reason people are switching. Not because someone told them solid wood was better in some abstract sense, but because they've lived through the alternative failing on them, usually within a handful of years. The replacement cycle nobody talks about. Here's the second reason, and it's arguably the bigger one: cost, but not the cost you're thinking of. A flat pack wardrobe might cost $150. A solid oak equivalent might cost $600. On the surface, the flat pack looks like the smarter buy. But ask yourself honestly, how many flat pack wardrobes have you? Or someone in your family gone through in the last decade? 2? 3? Each one ending up in a skip or a tip run because a hinge pulled clean out of chipboard that had turned soft and crumbly, or because damp finally got into a corner and there was no saving it. Chipboard doesn't really repair. Once the particle structure is broken down, there's nothing solid underneath to work with. It's not like a crack in real wood, which can be filled, glued, and sanded back to strength. Chipboard failure is usually the end of the road, so that $150 wardrobe often becomes $450 over 10 years, replaced 3 times, while a well-made solid oak piece bought once for $600 is often still standing, and can be restored, repaired, and refinished indefinitely. That's the maths that's slowly waking people up. Solid timber isn't more expensive, it's just paid for differently. A bigger number once, instead of smaller numbers repeated forever. It's also about what happens when things go wrong. This is where restoration comes into it, and it's really the heart of why I make these videos. With real wood furniture, damage is rarely the end of the story. A wobbly chair leg, a water ring on a tabletop, a scratched sideboard, these are all things that can be fixed, often by hand, often for a few pounds in materials. I've shown that on this channel more times than I can count. A joint that's worked loose can be re-glued. A stain can be sanded back and refinished. Even genuine structural damage, like a split leg or a cracked rail, can usually be repaired so well you'd never know it happened. Try doing any of that with a laminated chipboard cabinet. The moment the surface is breached, there's no coming back. You're not looking at a repair job. You're looking at a trip to the tip. The difference, repairable versus disposable, is quietly reshaping how people think about buying furniture. We've spent a couple of decades in a culture of just replace it. And there's a growing tiredness with that. People are sick of buying the same wardrobe 3 times. They want something that, if it does get damaged, can actually be brought back to life. Before we get into how a piece gets restored, it's worth understanding what you're actually looking at when you inspect an older piece of solid wood furniture. Because not all damage is equal, and knowing the difference saves you a lot of wasted effort. Cracks are usually caused by wood shrinking and expanding with changes in humidity over the years. You'll typically see them running with the grain, often on tabletops or panel doors. A fine crack is cosmetic. A crack that goes all the way through a structural piece, like a chair leg or a table rail, is more serious and needs proper repair, not just filling. Loose joints are incredibly common, especially on chairs. Over years of use, the wood glue in traditional joints, often old-fashioned hide glue, dries out and loses its grip. You'll notice a chair that wobbles or creaks when you sit in it. Give any joint a gentle wiggle by hand. If there's movement, it needs to be taken apart and re-glued rather than just tightened. Missing wood usually shows up as small chips or gouges, often at corners or edges where the piece has taken knocks over the years. This is normally a cosmetic repair, not a structural one. Water damage shows up as white or gray rings, dark staining, or in worse cases, a soft, spongy feel to the timber. Surface rings are often just trapped moisture in the finish and can be lifted out. Deeper staining that's soaked into the wood itself is trickier and sometimes needs sanding right back. Paint damage, flaking, chipping, or old paint that's gone brittle and cracked is common on older painted furniture. The good news is that underneath, the timber itself is very often still in excellent condition. Rot is the one to take seriously. Soft, crumbly, dark timber, especially near the base of legs or anywhere that's been exposed to damp, is a sign of rot. Press it with a screwdriver. If it sinks in easily, the wood has lost its structural integrity in that spot and will need cutting out and replacing, not just patched. Scratches are the most common damage of all, and thankfully the easiest to deal with. Light surface scratches often just need a refinish. Deeper scratches that catch your fingernail usually need sanding. Broken legs can look dramatic, but are often a clean repair, especially if the break follows the grain. A proper wood glue and clamping job, sometimes reinforced with a dowel, can make the repair stronger than the original. Loose glue joints, similar to loose joints in chairs, appear on drawer boxes, table frames, and cabinet backs. Any movement where two pieces of wood meet that shouldn't move is a sign the joint needs attention. Learning to read these signs takes the guesswork out of restoration. Once you know what you're dealing with, the actual repair work becomes far less intimidating. Right, let's get into the process itself. How a tired, neglected piece of solid wood furniture gets brought back. Step 1, cleaning. Before anything else, the piece needs a proper clean. Years of dust, grime, old wax, and general household life build up on furniture, and it can be easy to mistake grime for damage. A mild solution of warm water and a gentle dish soap, applied with a soft cloth, usually lifts the worst of it. Avoid soaking the wood. You want the cloth damp, not wet. Step 2, removing the old finish. If the piece is going to be refinished, the old varnish, wax, or paint needs to come off. This is usually done with a chemical stripper or, for smaller areas, careful sanding. Always work in a well-ventilated space, wear gloves, and if you're using a chemical stripper, follow the instructions closely. This is one of the few genuinely hazardous steps in the process, so don't rush it, and prepares the surface to properly accept stain or sealant. The general approach is to start with a coarser grit, around 80 to 100. If the surface is rough or heavily marked, then move progressively finer, through 120, then 180, finishing around 220 grit for a smooth, ready-to-finish surface. Always sand with the grain, never against it, or you'll leave scratch marks that show up once the finish goes on. Step 4, repairing cracks. Small cracks can be filled with a wood filler that matches the timber tone, or with an epoxy resin for cracks that need more strength. Epoxy is particularly good where the crack is structural because it actually bonds and reinforces the wood, rather than just sitting in the gap like a filler would. Step 5, filling gaps. For missing chips or gouges, a wood filler is applied slightly proud of the surface, left to cure fully, then sanded flush. Patience here matters. Rushing a filler before it's properly cured means it'll shrink and sink later, leaving a visible dip. Step 6, re-gluing joints. Loose joints are carefully worked apart, old dried glue is scraped away, and fresh wood glue is applied before clamping the joint tightly until it cures. This is one of those steps where a bit of extra care pays off enormously. A properly glued and clamped joint can genuinely outlast the original. Step 7, replacing damaged wood. Where rot or serious damage has taken hold, the damaged section is cut out cleanly and a new piece of matching timber is spliced in. This is more advanced work, but even a modest DIYer can manage small splices with a bit of patience and a sharp chisel. Step 8, staining. Once repairs are done and the surface is smooth, stain is applied to restore or enhance the wood's natural color. It's always worth testing the stain on an offcut or hidden area first, since different woods absorb stain differently. Oak, for instance, takes stain quite evenly, while pine can go blotchy without a preconditioner. Step 9, sealing. A sealant, whether that's varnish, oil, or wax, protects the wood from moisture, UV light, and everyday wear. This is the layer doing most of the long-term protective work, so it's worth choosing carefully based on how the piece will actually be used. Step 10. Final polish. A last buff with wax or polish brings out the depth and shine in the finish, and it's often the step that makes a restoration look genuinely professional rather than just fixed. You don't need a fully kitted out workshop to get started. A good set of sandpaper in varying grits, a couple of clamps, wood glue, a putty knife for filler, a chisel, and a soft cloth will cover the vast majority of basic restoration jobs. For finishing, a good quality brush or cloth application pad, your chosen stain, and a sealant of your choice round out the essentials. A few things worth flagging. Always work in a ventilated area, especially when using stripper, varnish, or stain. The fumes build up quickly in an enclosed space. Wear gloves when handling chemical strippers and epoxy. And if you're sanding old painted furniture, particularly anything that might predate the 1990s, it's worth checking for lead paint before sanding, since sanding can release fine dust into the air. The most common mistake people make is rushing the drying and curing times. Glue that hasn't fully cured, filler that hasn't hardened, or a coat of varnish applied over one that isn't quite dry. These all lead to problems down the line that are far more annoying to fix than if you just waited an extra day. The second most common mistake is skipping grits when sanding. Jumping from an 80 grit straight to a 220 grit leaves deeper scratches from the coarse paper that the finer paper simply won't remove. Working through the grits properly takes a bit longer, but the finish is night and day. When it comes to glue, a standard PVA wood glue is fine for most everyday repairs, but for anything load-bearing, like a chair joint, a stronger wood glue built for structural work is worth the extra cost. Epoxy comes into its own when you're dealing with a repair that also needs to add strength back into damaged timber, whereas filler is really a cosmetic solution for gaps and small chips that aren't under structural stress. For sanding, remember the rule of working progressively finer. Coarse to remove damage, medium to smooth, fine to prepare for finishing, and always sand with the grain. On finishes, oil-based finishes tend to bring out the richness of the grain and are lovely for indoor furniture that isn't exposed to heavy moisture. Varnish offers stronger surface protection, which makes it better suited to kitchen tables or anything that sees regular use. And if a piece is destined for outdoor use, it needs a finish specifically rated for exterior exposure. An indoor finish will break down quickly outside, regardless of how well the restoration itself was done. Picture the piece as it started. Dull, scratched, maybe a wobbly leg, the finish gone cloudy and tired, corners chipped from years of being bumped into. Now picture it after. The grain glowing warm under a fresh coat of oil, every joint solid and silent when you lean on it, the surface smooth under your hand instead of catching on old scratches. That transformation isn't magic, it's just time, patience, and understanding the material you're working with. And it's genuinely one of the most satisfying things you can do with a Saturday afternoon. So when you see more and more British homeowners walking past the flat pack aisle and choosing solid timber instead, this is really what's behind it. It's not nostalgia, and it's not about chasing a trend. It's people who've lived through the swollen chipboard, the peeling veneer, the third replacement wardrobe in a decade, and who've realized that real wood, for all its higher upfront cost, actually works out cheaper, lasts longer, and can be brought back to life again and again instead of ending up in a skip. That's the whole appeal of restoration, really. You're not just fixing furniture, you're keeping something out of landfill, saving real money over the years, and ending up with a piece that's often better than anything you could buy new. If you enjoy seeing old furniture brought back to life, subscribe to Timbermaster UK for more restoration projects every week.